In this lecture, we'll be talking about Lucius Cornelius Sulla. We'll begin by looking at Sulla's family background and his role in the social war. We'll then turn to Sulla's first consulship and his dispute with Marius over command of the war against Mithridates, and then look at Sulla's march on Rome in 88 and Marius's departure for North Africa. And finally, we'll look at Marius's return to Rome and the showdown between Cinna and Sulla. On the left-hand side of your screen, or of your slide, you have a bust of Sulla. And you can see he's represented in his very naturalistic state, lots of wrinkles, but looking every bit the military commander. Sulla served as Marius's quaestor in the Jugurthine War. So, in his first role on the Cursus Honorum, Sulla was elected into the Senate as quaestor, and Marius chose him as his essentially assistant to help in the Jugurthine War. Sulla was from a patrician family, but it was one of those patrician families that wasn't recently distinguished. So in the past several generations, not much had been happening in Sulla's family, that it was a family that had really fallen out of Roman governance. There's some thought that it was this very fact that made Sulla particularly attractive to Marius, that as a new man, Marius didn't want anybody who was going to steal any of his glow, steal any of his fame. And Sulla seemed like the right man for the job, that he was somebody that would be grateful for the opportunity to serve in such a high-profile war with such a high-profile commander, but would sort of be a willing partner, wouldn't be trying to usurp Marius's control. In fact, Marius severely underestimated Sulla, and Sulla managed to anger Marius and make a rival of Marius, make a permanent enemy of Marius, when Sulla tried to take credit for the capture of Jugurtha. So Sulla tried to claim that it was he who negotiated the treaty with Bocchus to get Bocchus to hand over Jugurtha to the Romans. Sulla's first consulship came on the heels of his success as a general in the social war. So he was elected consul in 88, largely on the basis of his service in the military, and especially his successes against the allies in the social war. As the Senate did, it came up with different commands and decided that Sulla was the guy to fight in the war against Mithridates of Pontus. Mithridates had been wreaking havoc in the eastern Mediterranean for quite some time. In Asia Minor, he had now come to Athens, to Greece, and there's some concern that Mithridates might want to move even further west. So the Romans decided it was time to intervene to protect their allies in the eastern Mediterranean, and that Sulla was the guy to do this. As consul, though, Sulla opposed the tribune of the plebs plan. So the tribune of the plebs at the time was Sulpicius Rufus, and he opposed Sulpicius Rufus's plan to distribute these new citizens among the 35 voting tribes. So after the social war, when all of these new citizens had been brought under Rome's umbrella, these citizens from cities in Italy and also Gaul, there was the problem of how to integrate them into the voting structure. So other citizens were assigned to voting tribes, one of the 35 voting tribes. But the question was, really, do we create new voting tribes for these new citizens? And if so, where do we put them in the order? Or do we distribute them among the existing voting tribes? And initially, the plan was to create 8 new voting tribes and to just put them at the end. Well, what this meant effectively was that those new citizens would have very, very little influence on Roman governance. They would rarely be a decisive voice in any election. Oftentimes they wouldn't even be consulted because the election would have already been decided before their votes were even registered. So there's a lot of opposition to that. There's also, in Rome, people who want these new citizens to be placed in the 35 existing voting tribes as a way of watering down the power of particularly the senatorial elite and the equestrians, who were really the voices deciding who got elected. So there's a lot of back and forth about what to do with these new citizens. Rufus wants to distribute them among the existing tribes. Sulla does not. So Rufus comes up with a scheme, basically. He knows that he needs more support to get his proposal through the voting assembly. So he gets in touch with Marius, and he offers Marius a deal. He says, I will make sure that you get the command of the war against Mithridates that Sulla now has, in exchange for your support and the support of your veterans for my proposal. So this is a pretty good deal for Marius, who has really been off the political scene for the last decade. Violence breaks out. This is an ongoing theme of Roman politics in the first century, that it seems like civil debate is not possible, that violence is always a part. And eventually Sulla and his fellow consul are forced to declare what's called a justitium. But what this basically means is there's a suspension of all business, including elections. This isn't a satisfactory result for Rufus and Marius, and more violence is going on. Sulla eventually actually retreats, and ironically, to Marius's house for protection. Eventually, the justitium is lifted. It seems like a big part of the reason, is that Sulla was simply afraid for his safety and decided that it was better to deal with the results of the election. So the justitium is lifted, the voting proceeds, and in fact, Rufus's proposal is pushed through. One of the results of this proposal, of course, is that now Rufus needs to deliver on his promise to give Marius command of the war against Mithridates, and Rufus does this. Marius, of course, is delighted. This is a kind of payback for him against Sulla, who had once tried to usurp Marius's glory in the capture of Jugurtha. So now, more than a decade later, Marius gets his payback. Sulla is absolutely humiliated. This is a great opportunity for Marius to regain visibility, but it's a crisis, really, for Sulla. So Mithridates of Pontus, he's going to come up again in our lectures, but just to give you a sense of where Pontus is, in Asia Minor, the star on your screen shows you where Pontus is, but Mithridates was really acting all over Asia Minor and even to the east in Greece. So he was a problem. He was harassing Roman allies throughout the eastern Mediterranean and forcing at different points Rome to engage with him. They couldn't simply ignore his attacks on Roman allied cities. This issue of the command of the war against Mithridates creates an enormous crisis, and not just a personal crisis for Sulla, but really a crisis for Rome. And it's one that it's odd that it happens. Marius at this point in time is a private citizen, and he has been for a decade. He's 70 years old. He's not particularly in good shape to lead a series of legions against Mithridates in a war that's going to be complicated. Mithridates does not just fight sort of in open-pitched battle. So somebody with recent fighting experience, with recent generalship, is going to be the right person for the job, not Marius, who hasn't been on the battlefield in quite some time. There's absolutely no justification for taking away the command from Sulla. Sulla did nothing to deserve this. This was simply political maneuvering, and Sulla happened to be on the losing side of it. But Sulla recognizes that this is a serious threat to his political future, and he really has to make a decision. Does he give up, so abide by Roman law, but essentially concede that he's going to have no political future, or does he violate Roman law, use the legions that he still has under his control left over from the social wars? So he has some legions down in Campania still dealing with resistant allies there. He can use those legions and march on Rome, but if he does so, he's in violation of Roman law. So it's a difficult choice, And one thing to recognize is that Sulla really has his back against the wall for reasons that really aren't his fault. So in 88, Sulla is left with a decision. He makes the decision to preserve his political future, march on Rome. Commanders had been sent down to Campania by Marius to take control of the legions that were under Sulla. Sulla's troops killed them. Sulla's officers desert. They recognize that this is going to be an illegal action and they don't really want a part of it. They're going to sit it out. Now, they're not exactly taking sides, but they're just simply saying, we want to remain neutral. We don't want to be caught up in what is an absolutely unprecedented action and one that is just shocking. This has never happened before and is going to possibly set a horrible precedent. In fact, we'll see that it does do so. Sulla's troops remain loyal to him. And again, it's interesting and important to note this distinction between the behavior of the officers and the behavior of the troops. And one of the things that it shows us is the extent to which troops saw themselves as loyal to individual commanders, not to the abstract Roman state. We've seen this before with Marius, and in fact, this is what Sulpicius Rufus exploited, was that Marius's veterans still retained tremendous loyalty to Marius himself. Well, Sulla's troops feel that same way about Sulla, and so they stay loyal to him, despite the fact that they're about to engage in unprecedented illegal activity. So Sulla and these legions march north from southern Italy, and they take control of Rome. There's not a fight. It's an easy expedition for the most part. Nobody in Rome is resisting. It's important to note that at this point in time, there's no kind of guard in Rome. There's no kind of standing army that protects the city. The only way for an army to be created is for the Senate to give a consul the right to have legions under his control. Sulla's march on Rome catches everybody by surprise, including Marius, including Rufus. Nobody's expecting this to happen. When Sulla gets to Rome and takes control, he now has the leverage to persuade, or really to force, the Senate to name Sulla's personal adversaries. So really these are personal enemies. This is a personal battle that Sulla is waging with Marius. But he's able to leverage the Senate and the legal power of the Senate to get his personal enemies named as enemies of the state, which then means that they're free to be killed. And this is done without a trial. This is unprecedented. We've had examples of people being named enemies of the state. Gaius Gracchus is one such example. But generally speaking, to be named an enemy of the state, you have to do something that can be pointed to as somehow working to the disadvantage of the state itself. It's not something that can be used in a personal battle, in a personal quarrel of the sort that really we see now between Sulla and Marius. So this is a highly unusual tactic, and again, it's one that's going to set a really bad precedent. In response to being named an enemy of the state, Marius takes off for Africa, where he has veterans that are loyal to him, that will protect him if it comes to it. Sulla then takes back the command of the Mithridatic War, and he leaves for Greece. He leaves to take on Mithridates. In 87, it looks like things are going to calm down again. There's been a crisis in 88. Everybody in Rome is freaked out about it, but it seems to be temporary. Once Marius leaves town and Sulla leaves town, it seems like everything can get back to normal. Cinna is elected consul. When he runs for consul, he makes no mention of the fact that he's even interested in the issue of the redistribution of citizens. But suddenly, as consul, he takes up that issue. And this causes massive rioting in Rome. It's an issue that brings out the deepest of tensions and the strongest of feelings among Roman citizens, among the Senate. And so there's rioting in Rome. Nobody wants it in Rome, or the majority doesn't want it in Rome. So Cinna takes his battle to Italy, and he travels around Italy rallying support for his proposal. And the implication here is that he is possibly even trying to not exactly draft people into a personal army, but he's rallying enough support that he could threaten the safety of Rome. And as a result of this, the Senate then has Cinna declared an enemy of the state, a hostis. And so Cinna himself is in a difficult position. Well, Marius once again sees an opportunity. He's off in Africa. He's failed in trying to negotiate power for himself back in Rome with the deal with Sulpicius Rufus. Sulla outmaneuvered him. But now with Cinna as an enemy of the state, Marius sees another opportunity. And it's remarkable to note the extent to which Marius, in his old age, undermines all of the good that he did for the Roman state. At one point, particularly after his battle against the Germanic tribes, the Cimbri and the Teutones, he was hailed as a savior of Rome, as a savior of the state, as a defender. Remember, he was given 2 triumphs by the Senate. Well, he's undermining all of that, and now really setting himself up in opposition to Rome when he allies himself with Cinna. So Cinna and Marius join forces, and we have a civil war in Rome. And this is a real civil war. There's real fighting in Rome now, and eventually Rome falls to Cinna and Marius. Once again, because there's no army to defend Rome. So there's not much that can happen, and Marius has the loyalty of his former troops. He's able to get legions together, and this is what makes him attractive to Cinna. After they take control of Rome, they purge their adversaries. They make sure that there's nobody who can fight against them. They have Sulla declared an enemy of the state while he's off fighting against Mithridates. So, in effect, they do the same thing to Sulla that Sulla had done to Marius. That is, co-opt the Senate, co-opt the legal power of the Senate in what is really a personal conflict, a personal struggle for power. So now we have Cinna and Marius in charge of Rome, but in a very illegal way. It's not clear how much support they actually have. And in the meantime, Sulla is an enemy of the state. In 86, Cinna and Marius have themselves declared consuls. There's not quite an election. This is a strange turn of events that doesn't quite follow typical Roman governance. But nonetheless, they hold these legal offices, these offices that endow them with legal powers. But interestingly, Marius dies before he can actually take office as consul. It seems to be a natural death. He seems to have died of pneumonia. But sort of despite all of his efforts to regain power, sort of at the moment that he finally is maybe in a position to do so, he dies. And there's a kind of irony here that he essentially in the final years of his life completely undoes the good that he'd done. And he's remembered more for his final years and his efforts really to undermine the security of the Roman state and to act in illegal ways when he tries to take command from Sulla in his alliance with Cinna, and not for his war against Jugurtha, his war against the Germanic tribes. And it's an unfortunate end to Marius's life. This is an image of Cinna on the right-hand side of your slide that just came up. So Marius is dead in 86, in the early spring of 86, and this leaves us with a showdown, a looming showdown between Cinna and Sulla. While all this is happening in Rome and sort of crazy things leading up to Marius and Sulla becoming consuls, Marius and Cinna becoming consuls, Sulla is off in the east dealing with Mithridates. And they're fighting mostly in Greece, starts off in Athens, ends up in central Greece, and Sulla is having a lot of success against Mithridates, but he's feeling the pressure to wrap things up and return to Rome and deal with the situation in Rome where we have Cinna and Marius back on the scene and where Sulla has in fact been declared an enemy of the state. So Sulla, really sort of looking out for his own interests rather than the best interests of the state, offers Mithridates favorable terms. And Mithridates, interestingly, doesn't accept these until about a year later, when it becomes clear that if he doesn't, Sulla is going to take him down. But Sulla has to defeat him in several more battles before Mithridates realizes he's really outmanned. Sulla wants to wrap up business in the east as quickly as possible. He goes to Asia Minor, he reinstitutes Asia Minor as a Roman province, and collects taxes, imposes a large indemnity or payment that Asia Minor needs to make to Rome in exchange for the fact that they had, in some cases, gone over to Mithridates. So he settles affairs in a kind of haphazard way in Asia Minor as quickly as possible so that he can get back to Rome. In the meantime, back in Rome, we have Cinna now preparing with his other consul to meet Sulla and his forces. Cinna wants to have the war to happen in Greece. He doesn't want it on Italian soil. He doesn't want it to look like a civil war, which is what it really was. So he is preparing to take his troops over to Greece. They're at the port of Ancona on the Adriatic side of Italy when his soldiers mutiny. And clearly recognizing that perhaps they don't want to be part of a civil war. So they mutiny and they kill Cinna. Cinna's dead now. And so what we're left with is the other consul, Carbo, trying to figure out what he's going to do about Sulla. Sulla is still an enemy of the state, but it's clear that Sulla is planning to come back to Italy, to Rome, to fight his case. So Carbo is preparing to meet Sulla in Italy. He recognizes that that's going to be the best hope for preserving the safety of Rome. And one thing that's interesting is that in Sulla's absence, public opinion has really shifted, and it's shifted to really believing that Sulla is a danger to the state. That the Romans and even the Italic peoples that are now Roman citizens should support Carbo in any kind of battle. It's also at this time that the voting distribution law, so this thing that had been such a source of controversy, is finally passed. So Sulla is not there to oppose it. It finally passes, but it's not yet enacted, and that's an important point, that just because it's on the books doesn't mean that it's actually being carried out.